UK Mental Health Charities. Mental Health Charities. They're handing sensitive data over to Facebook for targeted ads. This one really shocked me. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Crossover Connections with Jack Wang Podcast. My name is Jack Wang. I'm a scientist and college professor based in Australian University. Biggest charities in Britain have shared details of sensitive web browsing with Facebook. It makes you lose faith in a lot of the good intentions of many organizations. Users who clicked on content linked to depression, self-harm, and eating disorders, they were tracked and sent to Facebook. They would also be able to track clicking a link saying they need help, triggered sharing that data with Facebook. Even though it did not include details of conversations between charities or users, the metadata is enough, man. The metadata is enough to link to their Facebook account and start the targeted ads rolling into their individualized feeds without anyone else knowing. And these are very vulnerable people with problems, with serious problems. Facebook must have made money with this data and they must see value in this data. How intentional was this data leak? Was it part of an agreement? Did the mental health charities really knowingly sell the data? How did it actually happen? 20 National Health Service, NHS England trusts were sharing data. Plug in a piece of code that Facebook provided called MetaPixel, which embeds into your website. And the pitch that Facebook gave these websites is, hey, if you embed this piece of code, you will get analytics on traffic sources, on where the users are coming from. And every website lives off those kinds of analytics. This podcast, my YouTube channel, they all benefit a lot from analytics. So the fact that you run a website and you pay for that website, you want to make sure you get good return on investment, good ROI. So analytics is a good thing to have. But what was not made super transparent to these charities was that yes, you get those insights, but so does Facebook. Those analytics are shared to Facebook as well. Then you might get ads for hotel deals, or you might get ads for drugs, you might get ads for books or services that vulnerable people tend to want to subscribe to. And this is very distasteful. It leaves a terrible taste in your mouth. But this is the risk when you share your data and you enter your mental health data into a website or an app. This is very terrible and does not help the stigma of sharing mental health. Next article is from a long form New York Magazine article, which is really great. It talks about the therapy app Fantasy, and it deep dives into this topic in way more detail than I've ever seen. So it's really worth a read. It's linked in the show notes below. A personal accounting of a few different perspectives of how people interacted with these apps. And as I read this, I was triggered on some level, but also it resonated with me as a teacher, because this is really what we're trying to do in teaching as well. The idea of these apps that can connect with you and solve your problems is similar to the online learning problem that teachers have been trying to crack for the better part of 20, 30 years. A student halfway around the world can have an amazing educational experience while I sit here and talk to them online. That's the dream, but it's not yet our reality. This article has a lot of detail into it. It's very long. I just want to highlight a couple of things from it. The first one is the use case of how you're supposed to use these therapy apps really to make it seem like a dating app for you to connect with someone and find a mental health provider or counselor that is connected with what your problems are and connected to your demographics to maximize the likelihood that you might be someone that they could connect with and help. They could prioritize female providers that specialize in anxiety and advertise that as a feature of the platform. And this is from Talkspace, one of these mental health app providers. But then underneath this message were 3 male providers. So there's incongruence in how it's pitched and how the metadata lines up for people wanting to find a good counselor based on certain characteristics and what the realities of work. The employers can say, your benefit working here is that once a month you get a free visit to a mental health professional that's offered through this service. And in this case, Bob, he works in a cybersecurity firm in Massachusetts. He couldn't get a visit for more than a month. And the therapist that he tried to contact had 210 clients in his caseload and just didn't have time to see Bob. So it's hard to get a meeting. Like a dating app, you have to be able to reach these people through the app. And it's like a text message thread that goes unresponded to for days, if not weeks at a time. It's very different than the synchronous experience. Again, this is triggering for me as a teacher because we grew up as teachers and trained as teachers to be good in the in-class room environment, to connect with an auditorium full of students and to be effective in that medium. And during the pandemic, all of us are stuck behind these screens trying to communicate enthusiasm for the topic through a computer screen. And that's not the same thing. If we then take that metaphor towards online discussion boards, again, it's not the same. right? We're getting lots of student questions. We're trying to answer them. It just doesn't feel like enough for the students. It doesn't feel like enough for the teachers either. This is the same thing for therapy, of course. Like you'd need that synchronous thing. People would be texting and hours of testing. They didn't really want to be as honest. They wanted to be a bit more anonymous. And it also shifts the way that therapists do their work because you want to have conversation in the moment, having a conversation, but this asynchronous texting that you're doing on the phone is not the same. So it's a different skill set for the therapist as well. We've spoken primarily from the perspective of the patients and people who are vulnerable to mental health, but let's for a second think again about the therapists and the providers of these services, how it aligns with their training. We've already talked about it's different texting your patients as opposed to speaking to them in a conversation. But also let's talk about the pay, because again, all of this cannot be run on fumes of good intentions. It needs to be a solid money-making venture to then have the virtue of saying, hey, we can make a little less money if it means we can give services to more people. If you're losing money constantly, that is not going to work for anyone in the long run. You're going to harm all the people who have entrusted their data to you because you're not going to be around if you're losing money every single month. How much are the therapists making through these services? A therapist joined BetterHelp, working constantly, and she made $1,900 that month. Good, but not astronomical. You know what I mean? Like $2,000 a month for someone who went to medical school or professional accreditation in something like mental health. Depending on where you work, that could be a lot less money, but I'll just say it's certainly not what you would assume to be a full-time salary for a medical professional in America. The workload doesn't seem to be any lower than working in a full-time private practice. So this therapist had 55 clients. If they hit $1,000 a month, that would be a really good month for them. So again, this is not going to replace traditional therapy. Therapists will make more from having a practice and speaking to patients more routinely. It's not going to replace that. This is not yet a really bulletproof financial model that will be sustainable. So these apps and these startups are still making it up and figuring it out as they go, which again doesn't bode well for the individual, for the patient who is vulnerable. And at the end of the day, it's that same takeaway message. There's just not enough professionals who are good at communicating to patients and relating and empathizing and have the qualifications in mental health diagnostics and mental health services. So if you are someone with an interest in this, or you are a medical student, or you're someone who's interested in people, really consider going into this area, because we need way more people in this space, talking to people about their problems, helping them realize the severity or the extent of their mental health condition and directing them to other services or helping them have an ongoing conversation. There's just not enough professionals to fill the gap in clinics and private practices or through these apps. There is no quick fix for this, and we probably can't be trusting our data to these mental health technologies, at least for the short term. I'm Jack. Hope to connect with you again next time around.